The gunshot that killed her father still echoed in Clara Whitmore's mind as she knelt beside the Rio Grande, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white as bone. The water rushed past her in the fading light of August 1878, carrying with it the dust and heat of West Texas, and she prayed with a desperation that made her voice crack and her chest heave with suppressed sobs. Her father had been the only family she had left in this world, gunned down 3 days ago by outlaws who had robbed the general store he managed in Del Rio. Now she was alone, 18 years old with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. The funeral had taken the last of their savings, and the boarding house wanted her out by week's end. She prayed for guidance, for strength, for anything that might help her survive in this harsh and unforgiving land. "Please," she whispered to the darkening sky, her voice nearly lost beneath the sound of the rushing water. "Please show me what to do. I cannot do this alone. I am so afraid." The tears finally came then, hot and bitter, streaming down her dust-covered cheeks. She had been holding them back for days, trying to be strong as her father would have wanted, but here by the river with no one to see, she let herself break. "Whatever you are asking for, I am here." The voice startled her so badly, she nearly tumbled forward into the water. Clara spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs, and found herself looking up at a man silhouetted against the sunset. He sat atop a paint horse, his broad-brimmed hat shadowing his face, but she could see his hands were raised slightly, palms out, in a gesture of peace. "I did not mean to frighten you, miss," he said, his voice low and steady. "I was riding past and heard you crying. Are you hurt?" Clara scrambled to her feet, wiping at her face with the back of her hand. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins and hung in tangled waves around her shoulders. She knew she must look a sight, but pride made her lift her chin. "I am fine, just praying." The man dismounted in one fluid motion, and as he stepped closer, she could see him more clearly. He was young, perhaps 25, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were a startling blue-green, like the river in shallow places, and they held a genuine concern that made something in Clara's chest tighten. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, his leather vest dusty from the trail, a worn gun belt slung low on his hips. "Forgive me for saying so, but you do not look fine," he said gently. And a woman praying alone by the river at sundown usually means trouble of some kind. Clara wanted to tell him to mind his own business, to ride on and leave her to her misery, but the kindness in his voice broke through her defenses. "My father was killed 3 days ago," she heard herself say. "I have no family, no money, and nowhere to go, so I was asking God for help, and then you appeared." The cowboy's expression softened with sympathy. He removed his hat, revealing the full planes of his face, strong-jawed and honest-looking. "My name is James Callahan. I work cattle for the Three Rivers Ranch about 20 miles north of here. I am sorry for your loss, miss, truly sorry." "Clara Whitmore," she replied automatically. "My father was Samuel Whitmore. He managed Henderson's general store until he was murdered by men robbing the till." James's jaw tightened. "I heard about that. Sheriff caught 2 of them, but the 3rd got away. Your father was a good man. He always treated me fair when I came in for supplies." The fact that this stranger had known her father, even slightly, made fresh tears spring to Clara's eyes. "He was a very good man, the best man I have ever known." "When you said you had nowhere to go, did you mean that truly?" James asked, turning his hat in his hands. "No relatives at all?" "My mother died when I was 12. My father had a brother somewhere in California, but they had not spoken in 15 years. I have no one." The words felt heavy as stones falling from her mouth. James was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the river as the last light faded from the sky. When he finally spoke, his words came slowly, carefully. The Three Rivers Ranch where I work, the owner is a widow named Mrs. Sarah Bennett. She is always looking for help in the house. She had a daughter who died of fever 2 years back, and I think she gets lonely. The work would not be easy, but she pays fair and the bunkhouse has a spare room. I could take you there tomorrow, introduce you proper-like. Hope, fragile and tentative, flickered in Clara's chest. You would do that for me? You do not even know me. I know you are in trouble and asking for help, James said simply. And I know your father was a decent man. That is enough for me. He met her eyes, and Clara saw absolute sincerity there. You said you were praying for help. Well, maybe I am the answer to that prayer. Or maybe I am just a cowboy who happened to ride by at the right time. Either way, the offer stands. Clara found herself smiling for the first time in days, even as tears continued to streak her face. Then I accept, Mr. Callahan, thank you. Just James, please, he said, returning the smile. It transformed his face, making him look younger and somehow more approachable. Do you have somewhere to stay tonight? It is too dark to ride out to the ranch now. I have a room at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house until Friday. My things are there. Then I will meet you there at first light and we will ride out together. James settled his hat back on his head. The Three Rivers Ranch is good people, Clara. Mrs. Bennett will treat you right, I promise you that. As Clara walked back toward town with James leading his horse alongside her, she felt the crushing weight of despair begin to lift ever so slightly. They talked quietly in the gathering darkness, and she learned that James had been working cattle since he was 16, that he had grown up in Missouri but come to Texas seeking adventure and opportunity, that he was honest and hardworking, and sent money home to his widowed mother whenever he could. In turn, she told him about her father, about their quiet life in Del Rio, about her love of reading and her skill with numbers that had helped her father keep the store's accounts. When they reached the boarding house, James tipped his hat to her. I will be here at dawn. Get some rest, Clara. Things are going to get better. I promise you that. She watched him ride away into the night, and for the first time since her father's death, she allowed herself to believe that survival might actually be possible. True to his word, James arrived at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house just as the first pink light of dawn touched the eastern horizon. Clara was waiting on the porch, her few belongings packed into a worn carpet bag and a small trunk. She had slept better than she expected, exhaustion finally overcoming grief, and she had woken with a strange sense of anticipation. James dismounted and loaded her trunk onto his horse with practiced ease, then helped her up into the saddle. You ever ridden before? He asked. A little when I was younger, Clara admitted. My father had a mare for a few years. Then you will do fine, just hold on to me. He swung up behind her, one arm coming around her waist to hold the reins. The closeness made Clara's breath catch, but she told herself it was merely practical. They had only just met, after all. The ride to Three Rivers Ranch took most of the morning, following the river north through scrubland dotted with mesquite and prickly pear. The August heat built steadily as the sun climbed, but a breeze off the water kept it bearable. James pointed out landmarks as they rode, his voice warm and easy, and Clara found herself relaxing against him despite herself. There was something solid and reassuring about his presence, something that made her feel safe for the first time in days. You really think Mrs. Bennett will hire me? She asked as they rode. She does not know me at all. Sarah Bennett is one of the kindest women I have ever met, James assured her. Her husband died 4 years ago, kicked by a horse, and she has run the ranch herself ever since. She is tough as leather but fair, and like I said, she gets lonely. Her daughter Mary would have been about your age now. They crested a low rise, and the ranch spread out before them. It was larger than Clara had expected, with a sprawling main house painted white, several barns and outbuildings, and extensive corrals where horses milled about. Cattle dotted the surrounding pastures, and she could see several men working near one of the barns. James guided the horse toward the main house, and as they approached, a woman emerged onto the porch. She was perhaps 45, with dark hair streaked with gray pulled back in a practical bun. She wore a simple calico dress and an apron, and her weathered face broke into a smile when she saw James. "James Callahan, you are late for breakfast," she called out. "I was about to send someone looking for you." "My apologies, Mrs. Bennet," James said as he dismounted and then helped Clara down. "I have someone I would like you to meet." Clara felt suddenly nervous as the older woman's keen gaze fixed on her, taking in her worn dress and the signs of recent tears. But Mrs. Bennet's expression was kind as she descended the porch steps. "This is Miss Clara Whitmore," James said. "Her father was Samuel Whitmore from Del Rio. He was killed a few days ago, and Clara finds herself alone and in need of work. I thought perhaps you might have a place for her here." Recognition and sympathy flashed across Mrs. Bennet's face. "I heard about Sam Whitmore. That was a terrible tragedy. My dear child, I am so sorry for your loss." She reached out and took Clara's hands in her own, calloused and strong. "James is right that I could use help, particularly with the house and the cooking. Can you keep accounts, manage supplies?" "Yes, ma'am," Clara said quickly. "I helped my father with the store's books for years. I can cook and clean and sew too." Mrs. Bennet studied her for a long moment, then nodded decisively. "Then you are hired, Miss Whitmore. The pay is $15 a month plus room and board. There is a room off the kitchen that was my daughter's. It is yours now if you want it." Relief flooded through Clara so powerfully she nearly swayed. "Thank you, Mrs. Bennet, thank you so much. Call me Sarah, dear. We do not stand much on formality out here." The older woman smiled. "Come inside and I will show you around. James, you had best get to work before the other men start thinking you have gone soft." James grinned and tipped his hat to both women. As he turned to lead his horse toward the barn, he caught Clara's eye and gave her a reassuring nod. She smiled back, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the Texas sun. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that Clara found both comforting and challenging. She woke before dawn to help Sarah prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, 8 men including James who worked the cattle and horses. After breakfast, there were dishes to wash, floors to sweep, laundry to scrub and hang. In the afternoons, Clara worked on the ranch accounts, her neat handwriting filling the ledger books as she tracked expenses and income. Sarah taught her how to make bread that rose properly in the Texas heat, how to render lard and put up preserves, how to mend the tears and worn places in work shirts and denims. The work was harder than anything Clara had done before, but she threw herself into it with determination. It kept her busy, kept her mind from dwelling too much on her father and her grief. And in the quiet moments, she found herself watching for James. He was always kind to her, always respectful, but there was something in the way he looked at her that made her heart beat faster. He would catch her eye across the dinner table and smile, or pause to talk with her when he came in for water during the hot afternoons. He told her about the cattle drives he had been on, about wild horses and thunderstorms on the open range, and she told him about the books she loved to read, about her dreams of someday seeing the ocean. "Why the ocean?" he asked one evening as they sat on the porch after supper, watching the sun set over the distant hills. Sarah had shooed them outside, insisting she could handle the dishes herself. "I read about it in a book once," Clara said softly. "It sounded so vast and beautiful, like something from another world. I suppose it sounds foolish." "Not foolish at all," James said. He was sitting close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, and Clara was acutely aware of his presence. "I have never seen the ocean either, but I would like to someday. Maybe we could go together." The suggestion, casual as it was, made Clara's pulse quicken. "Maybe we could," she agreed, not daring to look at him. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and the stars emerged, and Clara realized with a start that she was happy. Not completely, not with her grief still fresh, but there was a kernel of happiness growing inside her, small but real. As September gave way to October, the heat began to ease, and the relationship between Clara and James deepened. He started finding excuses to be near her, offering to help haul water or chop wood for the stove. She started looking for him whenever she stepped outside, her gaze seeking his tall figure among the other ranch hands. They talked for hours whenever they could steal the time, sharing stories and dreams and slowly, carefully, their hearts. Sarah noticed, of course. One afternoon, as Clara was kneading bread dough, the older woman said casually, "James is a good man, one of the best I have ever known." Clara felt her cheeks flush. "Yes, he is. He has been different since you arrived, happier, he smiles more." Sarah gave her a knowing look. "And you light up like a lantern whenever he walks into a room. Is it that obvious?" Clara asked, mortified. "Only to someone who is looking, dear, and I think it is wonderful." Sarah patted her hand, leaving a dusting of flour. "Your father has only been gone 2 months, and I do not mean to rush you. But when happiness comes along, especially in this hard land, we must be brave enough to reach for it." That evening, James asked Clara if she would walk with him down by the creek that ran through the ranch property. Her heart hammering, she agreed, and they strolled through the cool twilight, the sound of water burbling over rocks providing a gentle accompaniment to their conversation. "Clara," James said finally, stopping and turning to face her, "I need to tell you something, and I hope I am not speaking out of turn. These past 2 months, getting to know you, they have been the best of my life. You are smart and strong and beautiful, and every time I see you, I find myself thinking about things I never thought about before. Things like a home and a future and maybe a family someday." Clara's breath caught in her throat. In the fading light, his eyes were impossibly blue-green, and the expression on his face was so tender it made her want to cry. "I know it has not been long since your father died," James continued. "And I know you are still grieving. I do not want to rush you or pressure you. But I need you to know that I have fallen in love with you, Clara Whitmore, completely and entirely in love with you." The words she had been holding back for weeks came tumbling out. "I love you too, James. I have been trying to tell myself it was too soon, but I cannot help it. When I am with you, I feel safe and happy and like maybe I can build a new life here. You are the answer to my prayer that night by the river. I truly believe that." James reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "May I kiss you?" "Yes," Clara whispered, and then his lips were on hers, soft and warm and tasting of coffee and hope. She melted into him, her arms wrapping around his neck, and for a long moment, the rest of the world fell away. There was only James, only the steady beat of his heart against hers, only the feeling of being cherished and wanted and loved. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, James rested his forehead against hers. "I want to marry you, Clara. I want to spend my life with you if you will have me. I do not have much right now, just what I have saved from my wages, but I am a hard worker and I will provide for you. I swear it." "I do not need much," Clara said, tears of joy streaming down her face. "I just need you. Yes, James. Yes, I will marry you." They told Sarah the next morning, and the older woman pulled them both into a fierce embrace. "I could not be happier for you both," she said, her own eyes bright with tears. "You have my blessing and my support. We will have the wedding here at the ranch, and it will be beautiful." The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Sarah threw herself into planning with an enthusiasm that warmed Clara's heart, clearly delighted to have something joyful to organize. Clara sewed herself a simple but lovely dress of cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. her needle flying through the fabric in the evenings by lamplight. James built them a small cabin on a piece of land at the edge of the ranch property, working every spare moment to have it ready. It was just 2 rooms with a loft, but he made it solid and snug, with a real glass window and a stone fireplace. "It is not much yet," he said as he showed it to her one Sunday afternoon in early November, "but we can add on as we need to. Maybe a bedroom when we have children and a proper porch where we can sit in the evenings." Children. The word made Clara's stomach flutter with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. She took James's hand, lacing her fingers through his. "It is perfect, James, truly perfect." They were married on a crisp Saturday in mid-November, with Sarah and all the ranch hands in attendance, along with a few neighbors from the surrounding ranches and the circuit preacher who happened to be passing through the area. Clara wore her new dress and a wreath of late autumn flowers in her hair, and James wore his best shirt and a string tie, his dark hair slicked back and his face shining with happiness. As they stood before the preacher in Sarah's parlor, Clara thought of her father and felt a pang of sorrow that he could not be there to see this. But looking into James's eyes as they spoke their vows, she also felt a deep sense of rightness. Her father would have liked James, she was certain of that. He would have been glad to know she was loved and protected. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher intoned, and James kissed her to the cheers and applause of everyone gathered. The rest of the day passed in a happy blur of food and music and celebration. One of the ranch hands played the fiddle, and James swept Clara into dance after dance, until she was dizzy with laughter and joy. As night fell and they finally retreated to their new cabin, Clara felt a flutter of nervousness. James seemed to sense it, because he took her hands and kissed them gently. "We do not have to do anything you are not ready for," he said softly. "I just want to hold you, to wake up beside you. Everything else can happen in its own time." But Clara found that she was ready to fully become his wife in every sense of the word. She pulled him close and kissed him, and he responded with a tenderness and passion that made her feel cherished and desired. Later, wrapped in his arms in their marriage bed, she felt a peace and contentment she had not known since before her father's death. "I love you, Mrs. Callahan," James murmured against her hair. "I love you too," Clara whispered back, and meant it with every fiber of her being. The winter that followed was one of the happiest times of Clara's life. She and James settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. They woke before dawn each morning, James to his work with the cattle and Clara to help Sarah with the household and accounts. But the evenings were their own, spent in their little cabin by the fire, reading aloud or talking or simply being together. They learned each other's habits and preferences, the small, intimate details of daily life. James liked his coffee strong and black. Clara hummed when she was concentrating on something. He tended to brood when something troubled him until she coaxed it out of him. She got cold easily and would burrow against him in the night, seeking his warmth. In late February, Clara realized her monthly courses had not come. At first, she told herself it was stress or the change in her diet or any number of things, but as March arrived and still nothing happened, she had to admit the truth. She was carrying James's child. She told him one evening after supper, her hands trembling as she took his. "James, I think I am with child." His eyes went wide, and for a moment he just stared at her. Then a smile split his face so big and bright it made her laugh. "Truly, we are going to have a baby." "I think so. It is still early, but yes, we are going to have a baby." James let out a whoop of joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around the small cabin until they were both laughing and dizzy. When he finally set her down, his eyes were bright with tears. "You have made me the happiest man alive, Clara Callahan. I swear I will be the best father I can be." "I know you will," Clara said, cupping his face in her hands. You are going to be wonderful." The months of her pregnancy passed with a slowness that sometimes frustrated Clara and a speed that sometimes frightened her. Her body changed in ways that amazed and occasionally dismayed her. Sarah was a wealth of practical advice, having raised a child herself, and the older woman's steady presence helped calm Clara's fears. James was attentive to the point of being overprotective, insisting she not lift anything heavy or work too hard, bringing her little treats and gifts whenever he went into town. "I am not made of glass," Clara protested one afternoon in June when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. "I know that," James said, taking the wet sheet from her hands anyway. "But humor me, please. I love you and I want you safe." She could not argue with that, so she let him fuss over her, secretly touched by his devotion. The baby came on a blazing hot day in late September, almost exactly a year after Clara had first arrived at Three Rivers Ranch. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Clara was certain she could not endure another minute of the pain. But Sarah was there, steady and calm, coaching her through each contraction. And James was there too, holding her hand and wiping her face with a cool cloth, his own face pale with worry. "You can do this, Clara," he kept saying. "You are the strongest person I know, just a little longer." When the baby finally came, a healthy boy with a powerful set of lungs, Clara collapsed back against the pillows in exhausted relief. Sarah cleaned the infant and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then placed him in Clara's arms. "You have a son," she said, smiling. Clara looked down at the tiny, red-faced creature in her arms and felt a love so fierce and overwhelming, it nearly stopped her heart. He had dark hair like both his parents and a button nose and perfect little fingers that gripped her thumb with surprising strength. "He is beautiful," James breathed, sitting on the edge of the bed and staring at his son with wonder. "He is absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" Clara asked, unable to tear her eyes away from the baby. James was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "Samuel, after your father, if that is all right with you." Fresh tears spilled down Clara's cheeks, but they were happy tears. "Yes, Samuel James Callahan, that is perfect." Little Samuel grew quickly, thriving in the Texas heat and the love of his parents. James proved to be every bit the devoted father Clara had known he would be, coming home each evening eager to hold his son and play with him. Clara marveled at the sight of her big, strong husband cradling the tiny baby with such gentleness, singing off-key lullabies and making silly faces to elicit those first precious smiles. As Samuel's first birthday approached, James came home one evening with news. "Mrs. Bennett wants to sell me 40 acres of the ranch," he said, his eyes bright with excitement. "She says she is getting too old to manage all this land, and she wants to see it go to people who will care for it. She is offering me a fair price and willing to let me pay it off over time." 40 acres, Clara repeated, stunned. "James, that is wonderful, but can we afford it?" "I have been saving every spare penny since we married," James said. "And with what I can earn working the land and raising our own cattle, yes, it will be tight for a while, but we can do it. We can build something real here, Clara. Something to pass on to Samuel and any other children we might have." The idea of owning their own land, of truly putting down roots, filled Clara with a deep satisfaction. "Then yes, let us do it." Over the next 2 years, they worked harder than Clara had ever imagined possible. James expanded their cabin, adding 2 proper bedrooms and a larger main room. He bought a small herd of cattle and spent long days mending fences and clearing brush. Clara helped with the ranch accounts and continued to assist Sarah while also caring for Samuel, who grew into a lively, curious toddler with his father's blue-green eyes. In the spring of Samuel's 3rd year, Clara discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect, and in January she gave birth to a daughter. They named her Sarah, after the woman who had given them their start, and the older Sarah Bennett cried happy tears when they told her. "You honor me more than you know," she said, holding the baby girl with the practiced ease of a grandmother. Life settled into a new rhythm, busy and full but deeply satisfying. Their small ranch prospered, slowly but steadily. James proved to have a gift for breeding cattle, and word spread about the quality of his stock. Clara managed their accounts with skill, stretching every dollar and finding ways to save where they could. Sarah Bennett remained a constant presence in their lives, doting on the children who called her grandmother Sarah and often joining them for Sunday dinners. When Samuel was 6 and little Sarah was 3, Clara gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Thomas and Elizabeth. The cabin was full to bursting now, noisy with children's laughter and sometimes tears, but Clara could not imagine being happier. James had built their ranch into something substantial, over 200 head of cattle now and a reputation as an honest dealer. They had hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, young men who reminded Clara of James when she had first met him. One evening, when the children were finally asleep and she and James sat together on the porch they had built, watching the stars emerge in the vast Texas sky, Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. "Do you ever think about that night by the river?" she asked softly. "When you found me praying?" "All the time," James said, wrapping his arm around her. "I think about how lost you looked, how broken, and how brave you were to keep going anyway. I think about how I almost did not stop, how I almost just rode past. But something made me stop, made me speak to you." "God," Clara said simply. "I prayed for help and he sent you." "Then I am grateful he did," James said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Because you and the children, this life we have built together, it is everything I never knew I wanted. You are my whole world, Clara Callahan." "And you are mine," she whispered back, her heart full to overflowing with love and gratitude. The years continued to roll past like the river that had brought them together. Samuel grew tall and strong, taking after his father in temperament and build. He loved working with the cattle and horses, and by the time he was 12, he was James's right-hand man on the ranch. Young Sarah was quieter, bookish like her mother, with a quick mind and a gentle spirit. She loved reading and keeping the household accounts, and Clara knew she would grow into a fine woman. The twins were whirlwinds of energy, constantly getting into mischief, but always ready with hugs and laughter. Sarah Bennett passed away peacefully in her sleep when Samuel was 14, surrounded by the family that had been hers in every way that mattered. They buried her on a hillside overlooking the ranch she had loved, and Clara and James made sure her grave was always tended, always decorated with fresh flowers. By the time Clara turned 40, the Callahan Ranch was one of the most respected in the region. James had expanded their holdings to nearly 300 acres, and they employed 6 men year-round. Samuel was preparing to take over much of the daily operation, freeing James to focus on the business side. Young Sarah had married a neighboring rancher's son, a kind young man named Matthew who clearly adored her. The twins were 15, both of them showing signs of the adults they would become. One warm evening in late summer, Clara and James rode out to the place where the creek met the Rio Grande, not far from where they had first met 22 years before. They dismounted and stood side by side, watching the water flow past, constant and eternal. "Do you remember what you said to me that night?" Clara asked, taking James's hand. "I said whatever you are asking for, I am here," James replied, smiling at the memory, "and I meant it. I have tried to be here for you every day since." "You have been," Clara assured him, squeezing his hand. "You have been my rock, my love, my partner in everything. I cannot imagine what my life would have been without you." "Lonely," James said, pulling her close, "for both of us. But we found each other and we built something beautiful together." They stood there as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Two people who had found love in the hardest of places and made it grow into something strong and lasting. Around them, the land they had worked so hard to cultivate stretched out, green and thriving. Behind them, the ranch bustled with life and purpose. And in their hearts, the same love that had sparked that first night by the river still burned bright and steady. The years ahead would bring their own challenges and joys. They would welcome grandchildren, watch their children build lives and families of their own, weather droughts and good years and all the ups and downs that come with a life well lived. But through it all, Clara and James would face everything together, hand in hand, their love as constant as the river that had brought them together. As darkness fell and the stars began to emerge, James led Clara back to their horses. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Callahan." Clara looked up at him, at this man who had rescued her when she was at her lowest, who had loved her faithfully through everything, and smiled. "Always, Mr. Callahan, always." They rode back toward the ranch, toward the life they had built together, toward home. And if Clara had been asked to describe what true happiness looked like, she would have pointed to this: a good man's hand in hers, children waiting for them, and a future full of promise stretching out before them like the endless Texas sky. In the decades that followed, the Callahan Ranch became a landmark in the area, known for its quality cattle and the integrity of its owners. Samuel took over the operation when James decided to step back, and he ran it with the same dedication his father had shown. Young Sarah and Matthew's ranch neighboring theirs prospered as well, and the two families remained close, celebrating holidays and milestones together. The twins both married and settled nearby, Thomas starting his own ranch and Elizabeth marrying a doctor and moving to the growing town of Del Rio. James and Clara grew old together gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. They spent their later years in the cabin James had built, now expanded and updated but still fundamentally the same home they had started their married life in. They watched their grandchildren grow, 8 in total, and even lived to see several great-grandchildren born. On a spring morning when Clara was 62, she woke to find James staring at her with the same look of wonder he had worn on their wedding day. "What is it?" she asked, laughing. "I am just thinking about how lucky I am," he said. "How blessed I am to have spent my life with you." "We are both lucky," Clara corrected, reaching up to touch his weathered face. His hair was silver now, his face lined by years of sun and wind. But to her, he was still the young cowboy who had stopped by the river to help a crying girl. "I think about what my life might have been if you had ridden past that evening, and I cannot bear it. You saved me, James. In every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," James said, kissing her softly, "and we built a life that was worth saving." They rose and went about their day, moving with the slow deliberateness of age but still capable and engaged with life. They walked down to the river that afternoon, as they often did, and sat on the bank watching the water flow past. "Do you think people will remember us?" Clara asked, a question that had been on her mind lately. "Our children and grandchildren will," James said, "and maybe that is enough. Maybe the legacy we leave is not about being remembered by strangers, but about the family we created, the love we shared, the values we passed down." "That is a good legacy," Clara agreed, leaning against him. "The best kind, really." When James passed away at the age of 71, peacefully in his sleep after a long and fulfilling life, Clara grieved deeply but without bitterness. They had been blessed with 49 years together, years full of love and laughter and purpose. She continued to live in their cabin, surrounded by children and grandchildren who checked on her daily, making sure she wanted for nothing. She often walked down to the river, to the place where they had first met, and she would talk to James as if he were still there beside her. She told him about the family, about the ranch, about all the small daily details he would want to know. And sometimes, in the quiet of those moments, she felt his presence so strongly it was as if he had never left. Clara lived to be 83, sharp-minded and surrounded by love until the very end. In her final days, she gathered her children around her and told them the story one more time, the story of how a young woman praying by a river had been answered by a cowboy who stopped to help. "That is where it all started," she said, her voice soft but clear. "One moment of kindness, one answer to a prayer, and look at everything that grew from it. All of you, your children, your children's children. All of this began because your father heard me crying and chose to stop, chose to help, chose to love. Remember that. Remember that small acts of kindness can change everything." When Clara died, surrounded by family and at peace, they buried her next to James on the hillside overlooking the ranch. The headstone was simple but perfect. Clara Whitmore Callahan, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and friend. Beside it, James's headstone read, James Callahan, devoted husband, father, and rancher. Together, they had built a legacy of love. The Callahan Ranch continued to thrive under Samuel's stewardship and later his sons, a testament to the foundation James and Clara had built. The family gathered there for holidays and celebrations, and the story of how it all began, of the cowboy and the girl by the river, was passed down through generations, a reminder that even in the hardest times, hope and love can find a way. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, family members walking by the place where the creek met the Rio Grande swore they could feel something special in the air, a lingering sense of peace and love, as if the very land remembered the prayer that had been answered there so many years ago and the beautiful life that had grown from that single moment of grace. The story of James and Clara became woven into the fabric of the ranch itself, a founding myth that reminded each new generation of the values that mattered most: kindness, love, hard work, and faith. The cabin where they had lived was preserved and maintained, becoming a cherished landmark that grandchildren and great-grandchildren would visit, walking through the rooms and trying to imagine the lives that had been lived there. In the parlor hung a portrait of James and Clara taken on their 25th wedding anniversary, one of the only photographs they had ever sat for. In it, James stood behind Clara's chair, his hand on her shoulder, both of them looking at the camera with quiet dignity and unmistakable contentment. Their eyes held the secrets of a lifetime lived well, of challenges overcome together, of love that had endured. And so the legacy lived on, spreading out like the roots of the old oak tree that grew near the cabin, strong and deep and life-giving. The prayer that Clara had whispered by the river that August evening in 1878 had been answered beyond anything she could have imagined, not just with rescue from immediate desperation, but with a lifetime of love, purpose, and family. In the end, that was what mattered most. Not wealth or fame or recognition from strangers, but the simple, profound truth that they had found each other when they needed each other most, had chosen love every single day, and had built something that would last long after they were gone. Their story was proof that even in the wild, harsh landscape of the Old West, tender hearts could find each other and create something beautiful that would echo through generations. The river continued to flow, constant and unchanging, just as it had on that evening when a cowboy heard a woman's prayer and chose to answer it. And if waters could remember, these waters would remember the love story that had begun on their banks, a story of faith rewarded, prayers answered, and two souls who had found in each other exactly what they had been searching for all along.